Today on Ag News Daily.
Sometimes we throw the playbook out. I really highly encourage them to keep the playbook in play when it comes to herbicides. Whether you're farming cotton, corn, or soybeans, south, north, the principles don't change a lot.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily podcast. Elaine Howell joined today once again by Michelle Stengler. Michelle, we might as well make you co-host at this point.
Yeah, I think Tanner might be joining next week. So really cool to see all the fun things he's having at these events he's going to. This week it was National Farm Machinery Show. And so I know that there was that big pull last night. It's a great trade show I've been hearing. So a lot of fun had by Tanner.
Certainly, we're jealous, but we'll see him next weekend again at Commodity Classic here in just a few short weeks. And we hope to see some of you as well. So we'll be sure to share on our social media accounts where you can find us throughout the week and say hi. Or if you want to do an interview with us, let us know. We'd love to capture your story. But Michelle, let's dig into some weather and news for this week, as temperatures here in the Midwest are certainly continuing with that warmer stretch. A large ridge of high pressure is bringing that stretch of warm weather to the plains and the Midwest, with highs in the 60s and 70s this week, and above average temperatures expected to last through next week as well. The threat of Arctic cold is on hold, though lingering snowpack in eastern areas could keep temperatures there closer to normal. Dry and drought conditions remain a concern, especially for winter wheat heading towards spring. And long-range experts at AccuWeather say the coldest part of the winter is likely behind us. But rising temperatures could increase risk for ice jams and flooding along the Mississippi River and Ohio River, along with severe threats of weather and wildfires for later in this season. So we'll be back with news right after this short break.
I just like the savings up front.
It's quick and easy. The simplicity of it is very nice.
10% more is just free money. So I guess it'd be crazy not to use it.
What do all these quotes have in common? They're all from real farmers and retailers, and they're all talking about saving money on Corteva Agriscience crop protection products with True Choice. See how much you can save at corteva.us/true.
Well, to get into some news, the rural economy, according to some latest reports and some sentiment we're hearing, continues to struggle. And news of rising farm bankruptcies combined with the USDA surprise increase in the 2025 harvest has added some pressure at a tough time. Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Jeff Cooper says a record corn crop should be positive, but demand hasn't kept pace. Cooper says government payments help, but stronger markets are what truly move grain. He believes the most effective solution is legislation allowing year-round sales of E15 nationwide, now under consideration by Congress. So let's get into some E15 news and what folks are saying across ag groups this week. Supporters say year-round E15 would help boost corn demand, but uncertainty remains after lawmakers failed to pass the measure earlier a few weeks ago. Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute Director Pat Westhoff says ethanol and much of the petroleum industry unusually agree on the issue, though disagreements over small refinery exemptions continue to slow progress. Westhoff urges farmers and industry stakeholders to stay vocal with their congressional representatives, saying producers would rather see support come from stronger demand than government checks. The E15 Rural Domestic Energy Council is expected to submit proposals by this Sunday, February 15th, with lawmakers targeting an agreement by the end of the month. So we are recording this on Friday. What will come out of that, and then continuing to follow the news at the end of this month, we'll continue to share it here on Ag News Daily.
Thanks for keeping our listeners in the know, Michelle. But let's keep them in the know about the USMCA as well and where it heads in its formal review later this year. Agricultural groups this week have been urging trade officials to preserve the deal while addressing lingering trade barriers and issues. American Farm Bureau Federation Senior Director of Government Affairs David Salmonson says USMCA has strengthened North American agriculture, boosted exports, and improved supply chain uncertainty. with trade to Mexico and Canada growing from $8 billion under early NAFTA to more than $60 billion as of today. If approved in the July review, the agreement would continue for at least another 16 years. A new report from the Agricultural Coalition for the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement shows that ag and seafood exports to Canada and Mexico generated about $149 billion in total economic output. Krista Swanson with the National Corn Growers Association says the sector has seen significant gains but needs targeted improvements, including fair biotech access in Mexico and better dairy market follow-through in Canada and Mexico. Former USDA Trade Undersecretary Alexis Taylor stresses that keeping USMCA as a strong trilateral agreement is crucial, and ag groups warn that removing that certainty would create instability as the U.S., Mexico, and Canada meet July 1 for that joint review.
Certainly a lot of people following it and what President Trump is saying. I know he made some comments, in the last few weeks, so we'll continue to watch that and as it unfolds throughout the year. Well, the USDA, some news there. USDA officials say they remain on track to begin payments for the Farm Bridge Assistance Program by late February. Richard Forts told Agriculture of America the agency's timeline, quote, remains solid as final procedural steps are completed. The program will allow producers to access, review, and sign forms electronically through the federal portal login.gov, which is already used by other agencies like the IRS and Veteran Affairs. Forts is urging farmers to set up login.gov accounts ahead of time to avoid delays once forms are released. He says the process is straightforward and that local farm service agency offices can provide assistance if needed. USDA views the Farm Bridge Assistance rollout as a test case for broader use of digital tools in future farm programs.
Well, keeping in line with some USDA news, the USDA is facing questions about the reliability of its crop data after sharp upward revisions to the 2025 corn acreage estimates. Reuters reports that concerns are tied to significant staffing losses at the agency last year and part of the broader federal downsizing, which some industry stakeholders say may have limited USDA's ability to produce timely and accurate reports. The final January estimates showing much higher corn acres than initially projected in June caused grain prices, of course, to drop more than 5%, hitting farmers already struggling with tight margins. In response, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, or NASS, launched an internal review this February of its acreage estimation processes to ensure future data is accurate and reliable. So it seems like they did take direct action there. Whether something comes of that report or not is yet to be seen.
We'll continue to watch it. Well, Michigan Congresswoman Kristen McDonald-Revitt warns that without additional aid, farmland could be lost and young farmers pushed out, with sugar beet growers particularly at risk. I know as mentioned a few weeks ago at the American Farm Bureau Convention that those specialty producers getting funding from there. That's where is the question, will there be more farmer aid? She co-sponsors the Democratic Farm and Family Relief Act of 2026, which would provide nearly $30 billion in new support, including $330 million for sugar beets on top of $12 billion from the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program. Senate Agriculture Chairman John Bozeman says additional relief wasn't included in the current spending bill due to caps, but lawmakers are considering $15 billion in aid for crop and specialty crop farmers through a standalone bill or supplemental package. Both stress the urgency of supporting struggling producers to stabilize the farm economy.
Well, Michelle, CRP remains in the balance as several major conservation programs have been reauthorized through the end of the decade, but uncertainty remains on CRP moving forward. Natalie LaDuca, an agricultural economist at the University of Illinois, says programs like EQIP, CSP, and RCPP are funded through 2021, while CRP is only extended through September of 2026, leaving its future unclear as Farm Bill negotiations remain unsettled. That uncertainty puts thousands of acres nationwide at a crossroads. LaDuca says existing CRP contracts should be honored, but once those contracts expire, farmers may not be able to re-enroll or add new acres if the program is not extended. She notes that about 800,000 acres were enrolled as of late 2025, with an average of $170 million paid out annually in recent years. If CRP is not reauthorized, those payments would eventually disappear and acres could slowly return to production, often on marginal or flood-prone land, which could have longer-term impacts on land use and commodity markets.
Well, there is a deadline approaching. The USDA is reminding agricultural producers that the deadline to apply for or make changes to crop insurance for spring-planted crops, whole farm revenue production, microfarm, and certain specialty crops is quickly approaching. Sales closing dates vary by crop and location, of course, with upcoming deadlines on February 28th, March 15th, and April 15th. Producers are encouraged to contact their crop insurance agent soon to ensure coverage decisions are made before the applicable closing date. The USDA Risk Management Agency provides detailed information through its actuarial information browser, where sales closing dates are listed under the Dates tab. Producers can also use the RMA Map Viewer tool to see insurance program options for acreage reporting, contract changes, planting dates, and end of insurance deadlines for each commodity, plan type, and practice.
President Trump's tariffs are facing renewed scrutiny in the White House after members rejected a further moratorium on votes to end the national emergency used to impose them originally. 3 Republicans joined Democrats in opposing the delay. House Speaker Mike Johnson argued the extension was needed to allow the Supreme Court to rule on a key case, while critics, including farmers, say the tariffs have cost market share, depressed crop prices, and raised input costs. Arlen Suderman says, while early concerns projected inflation spikes of up to 10%, actual effects have been closer to 2 to 3%, and some tariffs successfully prompted negotiations with other countries. Suderman also added that tariffs have also generated significant revenue, which markets rely on, meaning a Supreme Court ruling against them could have broader fiscal impacts. Any House vote to end the tariffs would still require the Senate to approve that as well, and the president's signature, making a final decision likely to rest with the Supreme Court.
While continuing on the global ag news front, the U.S. will temporarily expand beef imports from Argentina following an executive order signed by President Donald Trump last week. The proclamation raises the tariff rate quota for lean beef trimmings by 80,000 metric tons for 2026, with imports released in 4 segments through the year starting February 13th. The White House says the move aims to increase supply and ease ground beef prices amid historically high costs and a shrinking U.S. cattle herd. Matt Perdue with the North Dakota Farmers Union says the decision could create long-term challenges for U.S. producers, particularly the next generation, as competition from foreign suppliers increases. Perdue emphasizes that conversations about protecting domestic producers' competitiveness needs to be the focus going forward. So something that we're following up from a few months ago with Argentina and some of that frustration for cattle producers. This understanding, is something that we're going to continue to watch these next few weeks.
Well, Michelle, we have an update on New World screwworm, as USDA recently confirmed a horse arriving from Argentina was found with New World screwworm larvae during a routine inspection at a Florida import facility this month. Commissioner of Agriculture Texas Sid Miller says inspection and quarantine protocols worked as designed, emphasizing the case is isolated and unrelated to southern border concerns. The horse was treated immediately, and ranchers are encouraged to continue routine herd checks and report anything unusual to protect livestock. To prevent the parasite from spreading, USDA is releasing sterile screwworm flies along the U.S. Mexican border, including 50 miles into Texas, with the flies dyed to glow for easy identification. That's a new one I hadn't heard. And the new sterile fly facility in Edinburgh, Texas is expanding dispersal capacity as well. Secretary Rollins stressed preparedness efforts, including trapping, surveillance, and holding Mexico accountable. Meanwhile, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization for Boehringer Ingelheim's Ivomec 1% injection to prevent screwworm infestations in certain cattle at critical intervention points.
Well, the January's Purdue University CME Group Ag Economy Barometer shares a weakening farm economy, contributing to that drop, according to ag economist Michael Langmeyer. He says more than 30% of producers expect lower financial performance in 2026, citing a disappointing January WASDE report for corn and growing concerns about competition from Brazil. Survey respondents were particularly pessimistic about soybean exports, with over 20% expecting declines over the next 5 years. Langmeyer says trade will continue to influence farmer sentiment throughout the year. The barometer says surveys 400 producers nationwide each month to track the health of the U.S. agriculture economy, and we typically report it here on Ag News Daily every month.
I saw an article just late last night, Michelle, that also said Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies are up, I think 49% compared to years prior. So certainly not a rosy outlook for agriculture this year as well. But one thing that is rosy is spring planting season. I think that gets all farmers in a great mood as things warm up, tractors start rolling, and it's just around the corner. This week's interview focuses on helping farmers get their herbicide programs in check ahead of the growing season. As growers begin making those key decisions on weed control, what should be top of mind heading into the season? We're joined today by Corteva Agriscience U.S. Crop Protection Technical Lead, Eric Scherder, to break down what farmers should be considering this year. Throughout 2026, we'll be hearing about why Enlist from a variety of agronomy and crop leaders. So let's hear our first interview with Corteva Agriscience. Well, I'm super excited today to be joined by Dr. Eric Scherder, the U.S. Crop Protection Technical Lead for Corteva Agriscience. Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Delaney, for having us on. It's hard to believe we just a few months ago were harvesting, and here in a couple of weeks we'll have folks planting in Texas, and a month or two after that we'll be planting in central Iowa and Illinois and the Midwest. Seasons go fast.
They certainly do, and we're going to talk about some of those seasonal changes and what to watch for this year. But before we get into that, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about your background, Eric, where you're located, how long you've been with Corteva. How did you get to Corteva?
Yeah, so I grew up in Northeast Missouri on a diversified livestock farm, row crop operation, cattle, swine, whole 9 yards, big in FFA like a lot of folks. Had an opportunity, worked at University of Missouri Columbia, got my degree there, worked on the side as well back in the day when American Cyanamid was still around, which is now BSF, was an intern for them. And that's where I really found my love for science. And I went on to get my master's and Ph.D. at Arkansas, worked in the seed industry for 5 years, moved to Iowa where I was a scientist for our organization for about a decade. Then we created Corteva. And with that merger, and then I moved over to our commercial side where I've been for the past 7-8 years now in marketing, trying to help launch new products, work with our sales teams, make sure that it's important, in our opinion, that only are our sales reps very informed about a product, know how to make sure we can make good recommendations, but we try to make sure our retailers know what is coming down the pipeline as well, so that they can work that into their normal operations so that they too can communicate to the grower. We're going to make sure all the channels up and down that ladder are educated.
Okay, so if I heard you correctly, you worked in a myriad of different spaces, first with seed, with some different research areas, and now you're more on the commercial and marketing side. Did I capture that background?
Yeah, a very path to get to marketing. That's correct.
Well, I imagine, though, being in the marketing role now, after having worn so many different hats, you have a really unique perspective about how you bring products to market for Corteva. Before we talk a little bit more about what programs you're watching for this year, how do you think that background has supported your role in marketing, knowing some of these hats that you've worn now?
Well, I think, it always starts with sound science. When you think about Corteva Agriscience, we're a science-based organization, one in which we spend a lot of time not only internally, but making sure externally, working with universities, working with the right associations out there so they get to see these products prior to launch. And we're doing that in a safe manner. That's obviously always important to deliver the growers' expectations. Well, understand how we bring products to market gives me the confidence, I think, especially our portfolio marketing leaders that what we say is going to happen, 99% of the time will happen. And that's that confidence that we can deliver to that grower. We know it's a tough economic times right now. Growers don't like uncertainty. There's enough uncertainty in farming, but when we can make good decisions on our products, that makes their lives easier.
Well, certainly it's the season of decision making. I know we're having those conversations at our house about what we're going to be doing for the farm this coming planting season. But as you mentioned earlier, it's a cyclical pattern. We're starting to see farmers think about that. What should they be thinking this year, Eric, as it comes to weed and herbicide control?
Yeah, so, we just got done for a lot of growers a couple months ago harvesting. Hopefully, I always say, tell growers, especially around that combine time, that big window you're looking at, it's always fun to look at the yield monitor, but also be taking notes. And hopefully they took some notes of where they had problem areas or problem fields, things that we had weed escapes. That's going to help really that grower make better decisions in 2026 or tweak their program. Maybe Mother Nature threw you a curveball in 25. The right herbicide, just the wrong weather pattern. And there's something we need to tweak there. When it comes down to the herbicide programs, though, regardless of what commodity you're farming, regardless of where you're farming for that matter, it always starts with using all the tools in the toolbox. There's cultural practices, minimum till, no till, tillage, cover crops. We have herbicides, utilizing all those things in conjunction to have a very effective program. I think when we think about weed control, we always automatically go to herbicides, but there's other tools out there that we can utilize. But when you think about herbicides, we want to use multiple effective modes of action. That is such a key aspect. Regardless of the commodity you're farming, we need to start with hopefully 2 effective modes of actions on most of the key driver weeds or those hard to control weeds. And when we get in season, that's where we're going to want to do the same thing. We want multiple effective modes of action that are post-emerge. We also usually want to layer in some residual. The reason we're doing that is not to drive up the herbicide cost. We realize that every grower out there is looking at every penny they're putting in their operation. 26 is going to be a challenging year, but is to really ensure that we optimize that yield. If we're seeing weed escapes this year or the previous years, that's future things you're going to have to face. And if you have a high density or very hard to control weeds, man, it can take a devastating toll on that yield real quick. So that's why we really encourage to do those things.
I appreciate the way you've shaped that, is really to look at what happened last year and start to think about how do we be proactive this year. So let's talk a little bit more about proactivity when it comes to soybeans. What's your thought process there?
Yeah, when you think about, especially from Corteva's perspective, we've had a high adoption rate of the Enlist weed control system. Greater than 65% of the beans out there today in the U.S. are E3 soybeans. We also know that we have between 75 to 80 some percent spray rate, which is important. When you think about beans, growers at the end of the day, they get paid on yield. So we've got to have good germplasm, and that's where you talk to your local seed companies. But growers want to spray those soybeans with Enlist One or Enlist Duo. Now, when we specifically talk about soybeans, it is absolutely critical that we get that pre-plant, burn down, or pre-emergence on. When you look at our arsenal of tools out there, not just Corteva, but the industry, that's where we have a majority of our products. And a lot of times those products cannot be applied post-emerge. So if we use those multiple effective modes of action up front, get them at near full labeled rates. And that's such an important thing when you think about some of the cultural practices that have changed here in the last 5 years. We're planting beans before we do corn now, which means that herbicide's out there longer, which takes down the residual, means it won't go as far into the season as it once did because you've used up more time prior to that bean coming up. That's why it's important to use those near or full labeled rates. But once that bean crop starts to emerge, when you look at the toolbox out there, there's just not as many tools out there as we did pre. That's where growers start to rely on Enlist One or Enlist Duo. Now, when you think about how we launched that product line back in 2012, before we had the herbicides registered, before we even had the traits registered, we were talking about stewardship. From the time we've launched this product, we've always said tank mix Enlist One herbicide with other effective modes of action. Use at least 2 effective modes of action. Again, we're not trying to drive up the cost. We're trying to preserve the technologies, not only of Enlist One, but the other tools that are out there today. At the same time, we're also adding in residual products like Inversa, our new encapsulated acetochlor, or even a product like Everprex, esmetolochlor. In other words, we're trying to really top that residual tank off to get us all the way into to canopy closure, to try to keep those weeds at bay. If we're doing those things and thinking about that very conscientiously, we're really setting ourselves up for the best opportunity for success at the end of the season.
Okay, so let's take that even one step further, because you talked about different modes of action and really how we think about getting it through that weed, protecting from weeds over the canopy. So if we think about maybe some different use cases with Enlist 3 soybeans or Enlist corn, we focus a lot in the podcast on the Midwest, but certainly Enlist cotton as well. If growers are planning to use a program approach this year, what are some other things that they need to keep in mind, Eric, to maximize the effectiveness of that program?
Well, the other thing too is I feel a lot of growers, they have their best laid plans out there. And then we start going and sometimes we throw the playbook out. I really highly encourage them to keep the playbook in play when it comes to herbicides. Whether you're farming cotton, corn, or soybeans, south, north, the principles don't change a lot. I think there are things we can do differently. When you start, for example, minimum till or no till, that does see a slight shift in the populations, the weed species. A lot of our seeds, if we don't bury them, we really kind of reduce them in our weed seed bank real quick. That's a positive thing. There are other times where tillage is necessary. It seems to really help out on certain key weeds. Understand your weed species is always important. Understanding the time of germination is another. For example, ragweed tends to be a little bit earlier season. Mare's tail seems to be a little earlier season. We do know it can germinate throughout the summer. Water hemp tends to be a little bit later. Understanding when those weeds germinate also means, hey, let's make sure we have the right herbicides out there to really effectively control those weeds. So having that background is important. And then again, layering those residuals is absolute key. Once we start to run out of effective rates out there to control weeds, there's nothing. That ground in essence is naked. There's nothing there. So those weeds can really thrive. And we know problems like Palmer amaranth and water hemp, they can grow an inch a day. You get a rainfall event in there, and all of a sudden you went from a very clean field to 7-inch, 8-inch tall water hemp or Palmer. That's very difficult to control. That's the importance of having good residual out there.
Eric, one other question for you that was kind of scratching the back of my brain as you were mentioning the different weeds. Do we need to make any regional considerations as we think about weeds here in Iowa are vastly different from weeds in Texas, for example?
Oh, absolutely. I'd make the analogy. It's be like saying you've got some kind of ailment and you just go to a pharmacy and grab something off the shelf and say, oh, it's going to help me. I'm at a pharmacy. It might, but in reality, that's where your local retailer, your Corteva sales rep, there are products like Trivents for the South, and we've used other products like Kyber Pro, more metribuzin-based products we're bringing in our lineup. We have different products east to west that we utilize. We think about rotational crops where all those play a factor in choosing what products you're going to use in a soybeans or corn crop or cotton crop for that matter, and then what you're going to follow it. But at the end of the day, tailoring those to fit your local needs, and at the same time using, again, I can't say enough, near full labeled rates out there. When we start to reduce the rates, we reduce the rate of residual, length of residual. At the same time, we're not always getting the effective modes of action out there at the same concentrations. There's a lot of premixes that we utilize here for convenience. So that's why it's important to get those near labeled rates that whatever product you're using from whatever company.
The medicine pharmacy analogy is going to stick with me now, I think, for quite some time. So I appreciate you putting that into just such a visual way to imagine that. But Eric, if any of our listeners would like more information about the Enlist weed control system, where should they go to find more information?
As always, for when it comes to the Enlist weed control system, go to enlist.com. Folks, there's a lot of really good things we do each and every year. Product use guides. We're currently in our webinar sessions right now. It's a way that a grower can just kind of sharpen that sword a little bit. There's no shame in saying we all get a little rusty. We all do. Sharpen that sword before we go in the season a little bit. Or visit us at Corteva.us. That's where all our full product portfolios are at, depending on commodity. And as always, you've got a lot of local resources, whether that's your local retailer that supports Corteva or that local Corteva sales rep. There's a lot of ways we can be reached and get that information out to growers.
Eric, well, I certainly appreciate your time. Lots of good things to consider as we head into the next planting season. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Absolutely. And best of luck to all your listeners as we enter in that 2026 season.
Well, we appreciate Eric's time here on Ag News Daily, but let's hear a fertilizer update. In a recent fertilizer media update sent by Josh Linville of StoneX, tensions between the U.S. and Iran are rising, raising concerns for global fertilizer flows. Urea values continue climbing, boosting costs for other nitrogen sources as European production runs at just 75% of normal, and uncertainty grows over China's 2026 export plans. DAP in New Orleans starts the year at historic high ratios to corn, trading around $625, with December 2026 corn at $456, giving a ratio of about 137, analyzed by Josh Linville. Potash remains the only major fertilizer input still well priced, while with manufacturers keeping values steady relative to grain. But Zeleny, what's happening in markets this week?
Well, we certainly saw a WASDE report earlier this week, the February WASDE report, which had a fairly muted market reaction. I think that's no surprise after the fireworks report we saw in January. USDA did cut U.S. corn ending stocks by 100 million bushels to 2.127 billion, citing strong export demand expectations through the second half of the marketing year. Futures really saw little immediate reaction, and the next WASDE report will be on March 10th, just after Commodity Classic, so we'll see how things shake out then. And that will also be the quarterly grain stocks report, which will give us really our first outlook acreage report for what to expect this growing season. For U.S. corn, the 25-26 report reflected higher exports and lower ending stocks. Corn was raised 100 million bushels to 3.3 billion, reflecting strong sales and shipments to date. And as we look at crush and exports, USDA left soybean crush and export numbers unchanged, but some argue crush could have been raised. But the agency said they may be waiting for a new biofuel policy expected in March. As we look at our partners to the south, or our competition to the south, market chatter points to a lot of quality concerns in parts of Mato Grosso due to excessive rainfall, though no impact to overall crop size or demand has yet to be confirmed. And the U.S. Energy Information Administration reports crude oil prices are likely to decline over the next 2 years. So that sparked some positive sentiment in the crude oil markets this week, Michelle. But that is a look at the markets.
Yeah, it's wild to think it's the middle of February and we're experiencing maybe a fall spring. So I really hope that this warm weather that we're having in the next few weeks will continue. But a lot of news, a lot of probably anxious farmers ready to get outside.
Certainly, I know my husband is getting itchy to get started here. So we'll see things start to ramp up maybe even a little earlier this year with the warmer weather we've been having. But again, we'd love to see you at Commodity Classic. If you'll be around, shoot us a note and come see us at the booths that we'll be with that week. But Michelle, what do you say for today? We let the people go.
Let's let them go.